There you go. So yeah, so I guess like I said, where's the question we start off with is where are you stuck? What conflicts in your life are difficult right now? Get right to the meat of it. Like we can tell you a whole bunch of random general shit, but what's the point of that?
Yeah, we're not here to lecture at you. We actually want to help, and you can pick our brains.
I say with us, where we're stuck is I rely on him too much because I have a whole boatload of health issues.
So when you say rely on, what do you mean?
That moral support, someone, that ear that you need. I don't really have a lot of those people. I don't. I rely on him way too much. I feel bad for him. That's
being
just,
stuck?
well, not. I don't know. It's just.
It sounds like you have some guilt come up about that.
What?
It sounds like you have some guilt about that, putting too much on him.
Well, I do, yeah. That's how I perceive it, though, being stuck, because I rely on him too much. I'm like,
You see the habit when you can't break it.
yeah.
Right? And so do you find that she puts too much on you?
No, I don't think so. I don't consider it that.
Okay, so what we get into is an interesting conflict here is that you're actually both experiencing two very different, very real realities. For you, it sounds like there's not an issue here. Like you like being in that moral support space. It doesn't sound like she's going over and above to put things onto you that maybe are too uncomfortable or too weighty. And yet, for you, it's like that level of vulnerability, that level of trust, that feels difficult. Like there's something wrong with it. And what I'd like to invite you to consider is actually to reframe this is that unless he says that it's too much,
Yeah, I know.
then it's probably your projection. So the question is where does that projection come from?
That's what I was thinking is, where does that come up in your mind? What influences you to feel that way? Like a prior experience, or maybe when you're a kid growing up, did you feel, too much pressure to be something for someone else?
I think that you just hit on that.
Second one,
Yeah, the growing up, middle child.
I was a middle child. I can relate.
So you got like the older sibling, like, oh my gosh, he's the greatest. He can do no wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And you got the baby, like, oh, they can get away with everything that they can. And well, you're like,
And sometimes the only way the middle kid gets noticed is when they do something wrong, right? It's the
Yeah.
it's the Jan syndrome kind of thing. It's like there's a whole school of therapy based on this called Adlerian therapy, and it's like. Yeah, birth order has a big effect on people because it places people in these roles, right? Firstborn is always the responsible one, which they have the most rules because it's where the parents are the most insane.
Yeah.
Right, and so they hold to those rules steadfast. You have a baby who has almost no rules because by that point the parents are just exhausted. And then you get to the middle one where it's like they almost fall into the backdrop because the other two kind of shine are out there.
Yeah, the bookends get the most attention, and whether it's in my family, the eldest brother became a corporate CEO, very successful. The younger one ended up going to prison because he was causing problems, getting attention, in a negative way. He never learned that, bad behavior, attention is bad, and he's now suffering the consequences as an adult from not learning from that journey. Whereas I, being in the middle, had to find my own way, create my own, lifestyle and direction, but I kind of floundered. In some ways, I think it was healthier because I didn't have that expectation, and I channeled it and became my own person. But not everybody can, so I'm just kind of curious, how does this play into it for you?
well,
Pause. I apologize.
no, you're fine.
You know what we never did?
What's that?
Introductions.
Ah,
Or disclaimers, important things.
okay, let's do the disclaimer and intro here.
Yeah, real quick, and then just jump into that. My name is Helge Joshua Ruthier. I am a counselor in the state of Michigan. I'm also ordained Zen priest. What we're about to do is just sort of a group discussion. We already kind of started that organically. This is not therapy. No one here is paying us. We're just having a group discussion, kind of sharing what wisdom's been useful for us. To my co-host.
I'm author and publisher, transformational life coach, Eric Berner, and founder of the Limitless Potential Group.
Awesome. Yeah, so at the end we'll put up our information in case you need anything. All right, back to the question.
So my brother's successful, but not. I mean, he has his own path.
Okay.
Him and I are a lot alike, which is really scary. Because
I don't know how to take that.
no, it's good that we're a lot alike. You know, because my younger sister, thankfully she's not in prison, but like you said, had to learn how to fight for herself.
Right.
She's going through that. She's always relying on someone else to like pay for medical, housing, vehicle, food, whatever, and she's now to the point where she is like doing everything on her own. And
So it's very jarring for her because she went from basically being utterly reliant on somebody else and then having to kind of do that painful switch to nothing.
yeah, and with me,
You're the opposite.
with
You were
me,
probably very self-focused, very independent. I
yeah.
would guess being vulnerable with your partner, being able to ask for help is super hard.
Oh, it is, because growing up, I had to do everything for myself. Because mom worked, grandma worked, I was cooking, cleaning, doing most of the household stuff. And as soon as I was old enough, I'm like, I'm out of here. I'm like, moved in with him and his parents, but I still did stuff for myself all the time. I didn't have those chains. I was not trapped.
Is it safe then to surmise then that because you went from that state to being by yourself and then in a relationship, when life's issues came up and there was nobody else, tugging on you, that you're able to finally focus on just you and your emotional issues, that because you needed a little help, because we all do, because you're not in the normal role you grew up in, you feel guilty because you have to ask somebody else for help as opposed to just being the helper.
Yeah, because I'm the kind of person, I hate relying on other people. I need to rely on myself.
Right.
And I hate to interrupt you, but I gotta say this is like, your understanding is limited. It's that the problem is that you are wholly relying on yourself. In the end of the day, you're with you. When you die, you'll be with you.
Yeah.
Regardless of who else is around, you are with yourself until the day you die. There's a level to which your perception, your own subjectivity is 100% yours. And so that we are utterly self-reliant, and we just even get out of bed, we're having to use our own energy, our own capability. Now that being said, we are interdependent, meaning that our existence can only happen because of relationship, can only happen because of other human beings. So what I'd like you to consider is actually, even though you yourself have framed yourself as always independent, consider all of the people that made that particular type of independence possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Definitely.
So if you look at the fact that your family provided you certain resources, or even the state, even the society we have, there are various ways that we have provided to allow for this sort of perception of independence. And while independence is a wonderful feeling, if it goes too far, you get this exact situation to where people feel guilty or are uncomfortable with vulnerability, when the truth is that having that type of thing is wonderful. Like, yeah, can it get toxic? Can it get problematic? Absolutely. You gave us an example of your sister. I would say that the toxicity of the situation could be, it becomes codependent, right? If your reliance starts to damage you, right? It starts to become something that's incredibly too much to handle. That's one of those times when most people, they either it leads to A, breakup, B, it stays in cycle, and you both start hating each other. Somebody intervenes in some way, possibly looking for mental health, help, or whatnot. But the fact is that part of this has to be discovered through our relationship. And if he's saying, hey, it's cool, like, you're dealing with a lot, I can help, then, I would really strongly say kind of look at these thoughts and feelings coming up. Because I would argue that what you're calling guilt is probably shame.
That makes sense, yeah.
Because the difference is, for me, is guilt to me is an integrity piece, right? So it's a thing of, did I say I was going to do this? Did I do it? No, then I make up for it, right? It's am I holding to my ideals? Right? It's a do my words and actions. If I say I'm going to do the dishes and I do the dishes, then I'm good. That kind of thing. Shame is different. Shame's an internal violence. So what it is that we will then beat ourselves up if we don't follow some story, be it something given by our parents, given by society, something we've constructed ourselves. And so when we don't follow that, we pop the old Memorex tape in, and then beat ourselves up with the same story again. And And so what it sounds like happening is for you is to be reliant on someone is makes you some kind of person. I don't know what that story would be, but it might be really interesting to kind of consider that as what kind of person is reliant on someone else? What kind of story are you telling yourself? Make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, being an objective outside observer to what you're saying the situation is in your background, and we have similar, upbringing and perspective. Because I'm very much the same way, even though I try really hard to look into, psychology and human behavior to help other people. I know I'm guilty of the very same thought process that I had to control myself. I had to control my own life, my mental problems and everything else, and that it was all on me, that I couldn't count on anyone else. But as Joshua says, that isn't true. There were other people in our lives, so we aren't totally as independent as we'd like to think we are. We put ourselves in that role. It is just perspective.
Yeah.
So what about on your end? Curious. You're saying that her relying on you doesn't bug you, but I'm curious as to what is your perception of the relationship?
Yeah, I kind of have a protector role. I don't mind helping. I actually like helping. My area is my fear of, if I fail to help or not being able to help. Right now, because, medical issues, she can't work, so I'm the sole provider in the household.
Absolutely.
So I was worried about, if something happens to me or something happens to my job, not being able to provide and help or be there for me. I want to be there and help. That's where I first get. If I'm ever put into a position, if something happens to me or I can't provide, what happens to her if I am?
Well, the one thing you have to be careful with the helper role. This is just kind of a caveat. I don't know if that's what's going on here, but helping has two things. There's helping given out of altruistic care, compassion, right? I see someone in peril, I act at it. There are some folks that's not always the case, and it doesn't mean they're bad people, but it's more of a ego or personality thing where some folks are by definition helpers, and the way they've learned to do that is they've learned very early in their life that the way that they get care is to give care. The only way my worth is actually real is if I actually give care to other people, which can put them in situations of either overly giving, being in situations where they either form codependent relationships, or they tend to overdo it, which you'll see them then go through sort of a burnout phase. So one thing I would really just invite you to consider is where is your helping coming from, and is there a way that it prevents you from caring for yourself? Because one thing that's really important, especially in your position where you're the sole provider kind of thing, is that if you're constantly working, constantly wearing on yourself, if you're not providing yourself real self-care, right, keeping up your health, relaxing, doing things for yourself that are healing, then what happens is you're actually creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. By not taking care of you, you are more likely to burn yourself out sooner.
I'm guilty of that.
I've watched it. But the thing is, it's true. Like, you'll burn yourself out. We actually, in therapy and counseling, we talk about this. It's compassion fatigue. You have counselors that work too damn hard. They eventually just lose their capacity to really be able to take in anything. Right? They just burn out, and then that makes them really ineffective at their jobs, and makes them very ineffective at relationship. So I really consider that as what are you doing for yourself right now to make sure you're taken care of? Because while she may not be putting too much on you, you may be putting too much on you.
Right.
Make sense?
Yeah, I can see that.
And we're not saying stop caring for someone else. It's more about take enough time out for you so that you can recharge to continue doing what you feel you need to. And it's a delicate balancing act. And I can speak from experience that I overload myself with books and public appearances, counseling, all that kind of stuff. And it does get a little overwhelming, and then I think, well, don't complain about it. It's something I chose to do. In your case, you have to work, provide an income, but as a spouse, you also feel in the more masculine role in that social expectation that you have to be the provider in more than one way. Could be a role model, could be society's pressure, could be just your own perception of what you need to be. Whereas she grew up thinking, I got to take care of siblings and be independent. She may not depend on you as much as you put upon yourself. You know, so I think you two are very strong, independent people in your own right. So just be careful that, you know, how you're projecting who you are to each other doesn't become the overwhelming factor, because you're both putting that on yourselves more than you are to each other. Because you don't see her as a burden, and you don't see him as having to take care of you because you're a competent person. You know, so just keeping it more into perspective of not putting too much weight on your own shoulders.
I'd like to add to that real quick is that, so there's a couple things here. So did you choose your medical illnesses?
I didn't hear that.
Did you choose your medical illnesses?
No.
Like, did you fill out a tick box and say, I want this, this, and this? It wasn't like a buffet where you walked in and grabbed them. Part of the thing is that folks who are dealing with chronic illness, my partner has chronic intractable migraines, like 3 of them a week. So like, one of the things that, you know, she has to be careful, but I invite you to consider this, is that this isn't your fault. Your illnesses are not something that you asked for. They're not something that you're being cursed with. They just happen to be a fluke of genetics, environment, and bad luck.
Yeah.
And as such, this notion that you're a burden comes from the story that somehow this is something you're doing to somebody, as opposed to this is something that you are, something that you can't avoid. It's something that's just part of your existence. And you're lucky enough to find a partner who is willing to help you through that, take care of you through that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm thankful for him. Very thankful. He came in at the right moment.
Absolutely.
You know. Yeah, I think when I needed someone the most, that boy. You know, because a year out of high school, you know, and I've always been again the independent person. I'm like I was the kind of person never get married. Oh, maybe him. Oh.
Whoops.
Yeah. And I want to marry him like that though, like
Yeah.
instantly. But he made me wait a couple years, which is fine. You know, that whole, you know, slow your roll. Just,
I think some people rush in too quickly.
yeah, and with him, we didn't rush into it at all. We took our time to get to know each other, get to know each other's habits and all that stuff. And
So there's 2 little things I'd add on to that is that, so in the notion of waiting, I think that's a really good thing. Trying to say this in a way that's not going to get me in trouble.
get in trouble.
So, you'd be surprised. So, I'll say this, the thing that we call love in our society, I argue with is not love. So this initial super attraction, this desire to be with a person, want to be around them all the time, that flaws don't matter, they're the greatest thing ever, that's not love, that's your high. Right? Your mind's flooded with hormones, your body's going into pair bonding, you're basically being set up so you're stupid enough to breed.
It's a primal thing.
But here's the thing is that in my humble opinion, like where real love begins is after that part fades. Right? Once that high feeling goes off, you actually see the real flaws of your partner. Real relating begins because you're no longer under this haze. You're no longer stuck. So really, I'd strongly consider that as a lot of people say, oh, we met this time, that's when our relationship started. Well, yeah, chronologically that makes sense, but when did the relationship actually start? When did you actually have to really face the other person and be like, they're a whole human being, warts and all?
Probably that 2 years later that you wanted to wait.
Yeah.
You know, you strike me as somebody who is very type A personality. You know what you want, you go for it, it gets done. You know, you control your life, you know, basically. And you do too, but in your own way, you're a lot more, you take things more calmly, you see things a little further ahead down the line, and you just kind of slowly let life happen, but you kind of flow with the current.
She relates to me to like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. I approach everything logically. I like to analyze the situation.
So I can identify with both of you in varying aspects. So that's what's interesting for me is I see how you guys are. It's like you two are split halves of my brain.
Yeah.
So I can really get where you're coming from, and I think you work very well together. You know, it's that opposites attract almost.
Yeah, but we're very similar too in a lot of ways. A lot of people like, well, what's the secret to your marriage? We don't have one. Because we have so many people we know, like, how do you stay married for so long? Because how many years will be coming up in July? Like
23.
23.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and people are like, what do you do? We do nothing though. We listen, we talk, we fight, we have spats, but we don't
English
like,
speak. Go ahead.
we don't choke each other out. Like, we don't.
I would hope not. I would never report that.
But there's like no secret to it, just who we are.
Well, and this is the thing is that it comes down to really the key of relationship, in my opinion, is your lover, your partner, what they really should be is your best friend.
Yeah.
That you also happen to have sex with. Like, that's just
What is that? I don't know what that is.
fair enough.
23 years.
Yeah, eventually. But one of the things I wanted to add on to this, the word that was thrown around earlier, which was provider. And I want you to be invited into a concept of very logical thinking, right?
Yes.
So, one of the things I want you to be just aware of is that provider is not who you are. Provider, protectors, those are roles. At the core, you're a human being with vulnerabilities, with loves, with cares, with dreams. One of the things that men get really in trouble with in our society is they over-identify with roles, and they become the role, and try to shove all the other stuff in the background. We do it by hiding behind logic instead of being with our emotions. And society doesn't help that because it tells us basically all emotions are bad except for anger for men. Women, on the other hand, because they get shoved into the caregiver role, get to have all emotions but anger, right? So the thing is what I'd like you to consider is that provider is the role you're playing because that's the way you're showing care. But it's not the only way you show care, and it's not the only way that you are who you are. Being the protector, it's like we like to romanticize the warrior. This notion of the stalwart protector defender. The truth is that that's also still a role that we're playing. It's the armor you put on to deal with things, right? To be able to protect her, to keep your family, your love, your life safe. But at the end of the day, you can take that off. And so just make sure that's something you're doing. Never falling too much into those roles, because putting those aside and just being able to be with her as you are, that's the more vulnerable thing. That's the more painful thing. That's the more difficult thing. Because it's very easy to hide behind a role and feel secure behind it. Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
One thing I have noticed though, I've known you guys for several years now,
Yeah,
off and on. And every time I see you, without caveat here, everybody has problems and stuff comes up. But as an